I was thinking about what to talk about. When we were talking about the conference this year, there was a lot of conversation about should it be aimed directly at people who already are involved in the principles? Or should there be an element of outreach? Should there be an element of speaking about this in a way that would likely draw in people who didn't know anything about the principles, who weren't already curious? And there was a pretty clear consensus that it would be actually kind of, since the purpose of the 3PGC was outreach, that we wanted to talk about it in a way that would be relevant to anyone. And so the theme of happiness came up as something that we all reckoned was kind of relevant to most people, right? So we thought, okay, we're on safe ground here. And so then I was thinking, well, like what do I actually have to say about happiness? And I think it was because in my mind, I still think of myself as being the guy who would have, in high school, been voted least likely to ever be on a stage at a conference about happiness talking about happiness. And then I kind of realized, well, no, that's not true. I'm actually happy. In fact, I realized in an interview how much it had changed, where I was asked in this interview, and what's your 5-year vision for your life? And in the past, I would have had one. I mean, I would have gone for it. It would have been, not just the big this and the big that and these clients and this. And I really just, in that moment, spoke from my heart. And I realized, I said, well, I'm really happy and I love my life. And so 5 years from now, I want to be really happy and love my life. And I kind of don't give a shit what that looks like. You know? And so what I want to talk about with you guys this morning is I want to talk about 4 things. I think it's 4 things. And one is exploring, what it is to explore and how that's different from sometimes the way you might show up to something like this. What it is to explore as opposed to research, as opposed to seek. Okay? I want to explore the principles a little bit, in the 30 seconds they left me. No, but I do. I want to explore a little bit about that, just to give some context around that from my point of view. You're going to hear everyone sharing about that from their point of view. I want to talk a little bit about happiness. And then I'm going to actually share with you 5 pieces of advice from Sid Banks. Now, nowadays, in the principles community, they will tell you, I don't know who they are. I guess they is us. But they will tell you, right? That, we don't give advice, the wisdom is within everyone. Well, nobody told Sid that, fortunately. So actually, if you listen to Sid, if you read Sid, he points in a direction continually. And I sort of picked out 5 things that I found were extremely helpful in my explorations that I hope you'll find helpful too. So sound good? All right. So what is it to explore? Well, let me make a distinction between exploration and research. Now, research has an incredible value. There's going to be some presentations over the course of the weekend about research that is being done in this field. And the research, by its nature, what it does is it makes this accessible and acceptable to a wider world. It is an absolutely essential piece of kit to take something that is new and radically different to what the world currently thinks and demonstrate to people who won't even look until they see it on paper that there's something here worth looking for. But research is a terrible way to show up in this room. You don't want to research happiness this weekend. You don't want to have your notepad out and get data on happiness. You want to explore happiness. You want to have an experience for yourself. You want to look for yourself and see what you see, because what you see, you get to take home with you. Not your notes about what other people have seen, but what you have actually seen. That's not only yours to keep, that is yours to give away. And when you can start giving that away, the ripple effect is dramatic. I sometimes liken it to, if you ever watched one of those 1930s movies with the champagne fountain, with the glass, and then 3 glasses, and then 5 glasses, and they pour champagne in the top, and it fills all the glasses. That's what it is to explore, to see, to share from there. Right? I love the stories. I grew up in a very scientific household, and I used to love the stories of the early scientists who weren't researchers in the way that we think of research now. Like when Isaac Newton wanted to better understand optics and how the optic nerve in the eye affected perception, he took a needle, a knitting needle, stuck it behind his eyeball to poke around to get a sense of, oh, what happens if I do that? That's exploration, right? Now, this is going to be a little gentler, but no less instructive, right? Jonas Salk, who discovered the polio vaccine. Guess who the first person, the first human being who got injected with a polio vaccine was? Jonas Salk, right? That's exploration. If you want to share this in any way, there's got to be a this for you to share. And the this isn't in the data. The this is in you. So first point. Second point about exploration is not research, but exploration is also not searching. See, when we search for something, we think we already know what's there and we just don't have it. So if we search for happiness, then we think we already know what it is at some level. We already know it's not here, and we go searching for it. And if we do find it, well, that sounds good, right? Because the search is over. But what it means is every single moment that we spend not finding it is wasted unless we find it. And exploration, nothing's wasted. Every moment of an exploration enriches you. It enriches your understanding of the world. It enriches your understanding of yourself. It enriches your understanding of life. And when you do stumble across things in your exploration, that's just the beginning of more exploring. One of my favorite quotes, probably the quote that I share more than any other, it's in the very beginning of The Space Within, comes from T.S. Eliot. And he said, "We shall not cease from exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Well, that's why there are people here who've been exploring this for 40 years. They're not the remedial group. They're the real explorers. They're the ones who weren't just searching. They wanted to see, and then they wanted to see more, and they wanted to see more. Sid Banks was an explorer in my mind. He didn't stop when he had his enlightenment experience. He started. So we're here to explore. And well, what do we have to explore with? What are our explorer tools, right? Do we have a parka? Do we have sled dogs? Like, what have we got? Well, what we've got is we've got 3 fundamental human capacities. 3 principles that are going to fuel and inform our exploration. Now, when I first came across this field, Don mentioned last night, I was a little kind of, well, what is this? What are these people doing? Cult, not a cult? I don't know. Right? I've decided we're not. If we are, my bad, I'm sorry. Right? But one of the things that I couldn't understand is whenever I asked somebody who'd been teaching this for 20, 30, 40 years, what are the 3 principles? They went stupid. I mean, there's actually video of Dickon answering that question and starting and stopping and starting and stopping and going. And I'm thinking, guys, you named the field the 3 principles. You might want to prep that question. But here's what I've come to see. Here's how it looks to me now. The reason that people are so reticent to just answer that question is because of the incredible respect they have for this incredible gift that we have. And when you start to see that the principles are descriptions of something that is real, you don't want to make it sound like something you can write down on a piece of paper and tick off your research list. You want to try and do it justice somehow. You want to actually make sure that when you speak words about the principles, they're connected to this incredible, invisible truth about life. And so you do get a little inarticulate. Now, sometimes what comes out after that is beautiful, and sometimes it just stays inarticulate. And the weird thing is, it doesn't seem to matter. Right? I always tell coaches and teachers that we train in the principles that you have a secret weapon. You're telling the truth. You're pointing to something that's actually there. So even if you do a terrible job, there's a reasonable chance people will see it anyways, because it's really there. Right? So one of the principles is the principle of mind. Now, if we were to kind of just do the dictionary definition, as it were, right? It's the energy and intelligence behind life. Well, for me, I think of it as like the electricity that runs through us, that runs through everything, that powers the system, without which nothing would work. Right? It's the animating force that makes us alive. And it has an intelligence. Not an intelligence as in, well, yes, see, the problem here is blah, 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 blah. Not an intellect, an intelligence. Acorns always become oak trees. Right? We can see it in nature. I saw a documentary once. I've never gotten over this. Animals queue up. They stand in line at a watering hole by species and wait their turn to drink water. Like, I don't know if these are just British animals or all animals. But that blows my mind, right? There is an intelligence behind nature, and yet we blindly stumble forward as if that same intelligence does not guide us. And that's a mistake. It's an innocent mistake. But it's almost like we've got battery packs. And so because we're capable of running on battery power, we unplug. Not seeing that we have a whole different level of functionality when we're plugged in than when we do when we're trying to run on our own batteries, on our own will, on our own intellect. So another principle, another gift that we have to guide us in our exploration is consciousness. Now, consciousness, you'll notice if you just, as a sort of a point of interest, if you're relatively new and you are still taking notes in your mind, right? You'll go, yes, people have, they talk about mind, and that's a very quiet conversation. That one's nice. And they talk about thought endlessly. Thought, right? They go on about that for freaking ever, right? But everyone gets a little coy when it's time to talk about consciousness. It's like, it's like awareness, kind of. Not really awareness, I don't know. Right? And so when I came in, I really wanted to get it because I was researching. I didn't know it, but I was researching the principles. I wasn't exploring them. And Sandy Crott, just dearest mentor, the most patient woman on earth, right? We were walking on a beach in Malibu, not far from here, and I was asking her, well, okay, so now what's thought? And finally, like the 15th time, I said, now, what's consciousness again? She just looked at me, and I'm going to say it wasn't discussed. But she looked at me with a curious look in her eyes, and she said, why do you want to know? Now, that was a great question, because I realized in that moment I was doing research. I realized I wanted to know, and I actually said, I'll give myself credit for this. I actually said, I want to know exactly what you mean by consciousness so I can decide whether or not I agree with you, so I can decide whether or not to listen. Now, even I got that was a terrible strategy for learning something new. right? I got, oh, okay, I want to explore this. I actually want a sense of what it is that's lighting these people up, that's guiding them, that's moving them, that's transforming their lives. I want that experience for myself. I can't do that with my head the way I was trying to do it. Well, consciousness is a way of talking about that within me which could see that I was being an idiot. It was that within me which could kind of catch wise to my own thinking, that could wake up from my own trance, that could wake up from my own thoughts. And the beautiful thing about that is it's built into the system, right? You don't need an alarm clock for that. You wake up to yourself at deeper and deeper levels. You wake up to life at deeper and deeper levels. That's the gift of consciousness. Consciousness is doing the heavy lifting for us as we explore. And then there's thought, right? And the only distinction that I always feel that it's worth making about thought, because thought's the one where everyone goes, oh yeah, I got that one, is that we usually think about thought as if it's our thoughts about things that create our experience of life. If I had better thinking about death, if I had better thinking about my partner, if I had better thinking about the principles, that would change everything. No, it really wouldn't. It would be a little more pleasant for you, and nothing would be different at all. It's when you start to see that the thing itself is made of thought, that everything you can think about is in and of itself made of thought, and therefore can change in a heartbeat. That's why somebody who experienced deep trauma can be over it literally in a heartbeat. That's why somebody voted least likely to ever give a talk on happiness can stand up here and not be full of shit, right? That's why it really doesn't matter what's happened in the past when you're looking for what's possible in the present and into the future. That's thought. And so that's what we got, right? That's what we've got going for us. We have this intelligence that will guide us if we let it. We have this capacity to know, to wake up to ourselves more and more and more. And we have this incredible creative force that's always on, always creating our experience moment by moment. And if we aim those three things at happiness, we'll see stuff, right? If these are the principles underlying everything, if these are actually true, and that is what all of us are standing up here asserting for the next 3 days, that this is not a theory, this is true, then this has to be the truth about happiness too. So we call this big thing redefining happiness. And I'm not intending to do the disservice of defining happiness, but I think it's useful to redefine it. So for most people, happy is the opposite of sad, right? That is the standard definition. Are you happy? No. Are you happy? Yeah. Right? Shiny happy people. LA. Right? Right? Well, that's such a limited definition of happiness because that's just a state of mind. That's totally transient. That's apparently transient. Most people can see that at a glance, that that's not a lasting thing. So if we think of words as descriptions of things, then happiness is a word we can use to describe whatever it is in us that doesn't change with our thinking. Whatever it is in us that doesn't go up and down with our moods. Whatever it is in us that is permanent. That, and now I'm talking based on other people's words, but they mean something to me. It is that thing which was here before we were born and will be here after we're gone. And that is the richest territory on earth I know to explore. I'm a success guy, right? That was my thing. Success, success! I really wanted to be Tony Robbins, but I'm short and clumsy, and I just can't eat like that, and it didn't work out, right? But I was still always looking for success. I was looking for, well, what would that be? And I remember, actually, at my first conference, it was, I think it may have been the UK conference. And I remember Bill Pettit standing up in front of the room and sharing a little quote from Sid's book, Second Chance, where there's two characters, sort of a seeker and a seer. And the seeker asks the seer, well, how do you define success? And the seer says, happiness and contentment. And the seeker says, is that it? And the seer says, yes. And I remember hearing that and going, well, shit, that's true. Like, that's it. Like, that's really it. Not that I know we do things when we're happy, right? We don't actually just sit in one place and do nothing. That's depression. I knew that really well. Right? That happiness comes with aliveness. It comes with that life force, that animating force. There's more of that in happiness than there is in other states of mind. So I went on my search, and along the way, as I said, I was guided by an explorer who came before me, right? Someone who saw, a guy named Sid Banks. George, I know, is going to be talking a lot more about Sid Banks. Other people are who actually knew him. I didn't know him, but he left journals, right? He left notes from his explorations that were captured in books and audios and videos. And so I looked at his notes because I thought that would be really helpful as I went on my exploration, not as a substitute for my exploration, right? If all I had done was read Sid's journals from his exploration, I would have come away as an absolute expert on what Sid saw. And it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference in my life. But boy, was it helpful before I put on my parka and hitched the dog to the sled. Actually, that is a horrible image. If I tried to hitch my dog, Sergeant Pepper, to a sled, I can pretty much tell you what would happen is he would sit very cutely, look at me, and just kind of wonder when I was going to let him off and give him a treat. It would go nowhere. But anyways, it's a metaphor. So I would hitch my dog to the sled, right? And it was really useful to have access to Sid's journals, to Sid's experience, to Sid's guidance as I went on my exploration. And so here are the 5 things that came to me when I was thinking about this that I found probably most helpful. And the first one is the most annoying one. You might find another one more annoying than this, but which is, don't listen to my words. What do you do with that? Right? Like when I came in with my notebook, that was like the second most frustrating thing. The most frustrating one was when I found myself writing down, he who memorizes one single word of truth realizes that he does not know. Oh, scratch, right? Don't listen to my words. Well, all I can tell you is what that has meant to me. It's meant, don't worry about the articulation. Worry about, and I use worry loosely, but worry about seeing something worth articulating. Right? We spend, in my mind, far too much trying to figure out how to talk about this and far too little time really getting to know what this is. You will never go wrong going deeper. It's easy to go wrong getting more fluid in your articulation. So that, to me, is what I took from don't listen to the words. Right? It's not in the words point to something. It's not in the point, it's actually looking where the point is pointing, right? So second piece of advice, guiding point from Sid's notes, Sid's journals. Listen to truth and search for beautiful feelings. Well, I liked that one. I like that one, and that's something you're going to have an opportunity to do over the next 3 days, is listen to truth. Listen to each of us doing our best to speak truth. Not our truth specifically, but that which is true beyond our articulation or interpretation of it. And in fact, I've read in certain places where Sid says the only way to raise your consciousness is to hear truth. So listen to truth and search for beautiful feelings. He would often say, if you listen to recordings, it's in the feeling. And it's a beautiful feeling. Now, I made up so much about that, right? I made up that it was a very specific feeling, and how would I know the feeling, and could I recreate the feeling in my body, and if I stood this way, would I feel it more than if I stood that way? And I mean, I just went to town with it, but I also had moments where I just found myself in beautiful feelings. And in those moments, I kind of got it. There was kind of nothing else to do. That was almost like the ground from which I could explore, were those beautiful feelings that would come up, and that come up for all of us as our thinking quiets down. They seem to be part of the nature of this thing that we could call happiness. Well, the third thing that I got that Sid said about how do you explore this, right, was look in a direction and do nothing. Now, this often seems to have become shortcutted in principles teaching to do nothing, which is terrible advice. In the context of look in a direction and do nothing, it's the only sane piece of advice you could have. Do me a favor, look behind you. Literally, look behind you, right? Okay, and look. Now, if you're not looking, you're doing research. If you look, you're exploring. Look behind you. Keep looking behind you. Don't worry, I'm not going to put on a funny hat, right? And do nothing. And notice what starts to happen. And my guess is that as you look in a direction and do nothing, you'll start to see more. Because that's what happens when we look in a direction and do nothing. We see more. We don't have to try to see. We don't have to look for something particularly. If we look in a direction and do nothing, we will see more and more and more. That's it. That's what you do. If you want to know, how do I do this better? That's what you do. Now, the problem with that, for my overactive head, was, well, which direction? Right? Which direction do I look in, Sid? Right? And I would ask everybody in this room, right? Well, which direction do I look in? And they would say things like, look to mind. And I was like, I don't know where mind is. And then they'd say, well, look where you don't know where to look. And it drove me nuts. So I went back to Sid, right, to see if he had anything else to say on the matter. And he said, look within. Okay, that was a little more helpful to me. Now, I did briefly interpret that as literally, okay, scan my body and try and find, like, literally that. But as I listened more to truth and as I looked more within, it's simply to the inner world. To the world that's still there when you close your eyes. To the world that actually is a world of infinite possibility, not the world of limited reality that we tend to see when we open our eyes and look around. And that was helpful. But possibly for me, the most helpful, the most useful, the most impactful piece of advice I got from reading Sid's journals about his explorations as I set out on my own exploration was when he said, what we're looking for is a silent mind. What we're looking for is a silent mind. Now, I didn't intuit that. I thought I was looking for a certain thought, or a certain quality of thought, or a certain experience, or a certain feeling. But there was something very helpful to me in seeing that what I was looking for was a silent mind. And that what a silent mind was wasn't a mind in which there was no noise. It was the mind within which noise comes and goes. It was the space within which experience comes and goes. It was the quiet within which we hear music. In fact, it's the quiet that makes music music and not just a bunch of notes. It's the space between the letters that lets us read the words. It's that which is always present underneath the infinite variability of our own imagination, of our own thinking, of our own personal mind. And that's kind of the best I got for you heading into these 3 days, is to let this be an exploration, not a search for the right answer, not a collection of data points. To see what you can see about the principles, not by defining them, but by seeing what it is that we're all attempting to define. To broaden your definition of happiness to something that's far beyond the opposite of sadness. And as best you can, to look within and look for a silent mind. Thank you.